If everyone can hear me, and the people in Ottawa here can tone it down a little bit for a second. That's all right. I'm going to get started just a little bit early. First thing I want to recommend is everybody make sure their mute buttons are on, because I can see there's some fair bit of discussion in I think, different places, so just check that. I want to go through the, Gail told me that we need to remind everyone about how we do questions. Questions will be at the end. There's a lot of people here, a lot of sites here today. So I think the plan is, rather than going through the typical process of me calling out Dalhousie and then waiting for a while until people fiddle around and find their mute buttons, what we're going to do is we're going to ask people who have questions, use that chat function on WebEx. I don't know, it's up on the screen here in Ottawa, but I don't know whether it is or not. But the idea is to send the message to Gail, who's the moderator, KT moderator, and she will deal with the questions at the end. Our sense is that there is a lot of sites, so maybe less time for questions than we want, but we'll try to do as best we can. So we'll have a go at that and see how that goes. That said, let me get us started here. My name's Jamie Braho. I'm a scientist here at the Ottawa Hospital. It's my pleasure to introduce he who needs not be introduced in this particular context. But I'm going to do it anyway. It's Jeremy Grimshaw talking today. Jeremy, as most people likely well know, is a large figure in knowledge translation research, both here in Canada and worldwide. He got his PhD in the University of Aberdeen. He has moved to Ottawa in 2002. He's a senior scientist here at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. A Tier 1 chair in Health, Knowledge Transfer and Uptake, Canada Research Chair. He's a corresponding fellow of Royal Society of Edinburgh, and many other things. Jeremy has the office next to me here in Ottawa, a fact that I'm usually very grateful for, except for the occasional time when extremely strange and apparently avant-garde jazz music comes blaring out of his office. I'm not going to hold that too much against him, however. That being said, I will pass it on to him, hoping that he's heard all of this and is ready to go. So, Jeremy.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Thanks for the introduction. I should say to people that I am Jamie's next door person at work, but frequently we're on the end of the phone because I'm not there, so I do apologize to my colleagues in Ottawa. But I'm delighted to be here at St. Mike's today, and I'm going to start my talk, increasing value and reducing waste in implementation research.
And then you that.
And okay, is this now going to work? Yeah, okay, so just wanted to start with a kind of question. I'll ask people in this room, how much money do you think we spend in Canada each year on R&D? Is it less than 5 billion, 5 to 10 billion, 10 to 20 billion, 20 to 30 billion, or over 30 billion? So I can't see people across the country, but just in this room, who thinks we spend less than 5 billion? Okay, 5 to 10? Okay, a couple of people? 10 to 20?
Over 30.
20 to 30? And 30, more than 30. Well, according to the OECD, it's around 20 to 30, but actually in this room there's a fairly even spread. Probably slightly more people did get the question right, but yeah, true, we spend a lot of money doing research. And so, if we're spending that much, including 9 billion of government, i.e. public funding on research, we really want to make sure that the research we do is of high quality and that it can inform the questions that we address. However, in the Lancet in 2014, there's a very important series on reducing waste in research, and Malcolm McLeod in the lead article noted in 2009 Ian Chalmers and Paul Glasgow estimated that around 85% of research investment, equating to $200 billion of investment in 2010, was wasted. So this is a fairly serious charge, and various people will sort of say, well, 85% seems like a fairly high number, surely it's not that bad. But even if it was 20% or 30%, we would actually be somewhat concerned about this. This is a huge waste of public resources. And Malcolm McLeod identified sort of 5 reasons why we have waste. We basically do research that are not relevant to the users of the research. We ask the wrong questions. We use the wrong designs as we go over. We then get bogged down with inefficient research regulation and management. We don't publish our results. When we do publish those, we don't do a very good job of publishing our results. And so all of these things together mean that actually the benefits of the research that we do may be basically undermined. So for the first of the talk, I've called this implementation science. Katie Canada seminar. Jamie said I do KT science. Before I came to Canada, I used to call what I did doing implementation research, then rebadged it as KT. Now it seems like I can go back to saying it's implementation science. So if you want, read this as KT. I'm just using implementation as my language today. Yeah, for the last 27 years or so, I've been doing implementation science. And the idea here is that implementation is a human enterprise that we can study to understand and improve implementation approaches. So implementation science then is a study of determinants, process, and outcomes of implementation. And the goal is to develop a generalisable, empirical, and theoretical basis to optimise implementation activities. Now, when Malcolm McLeod developed and colleagues published this diagram, they didn't single out any particular area of research. They said this kind of applies from basic science through to population health research. So I guess one of the things I would be interested to talk about is whether we think research waste in implementation science is worse than other areas of health research, the same as other areas, better than other areas, or we just depend. So in this room, how many people think that we're much worse than other areas of science in terms of the waste of what we do? No. Okay, it's a bit like 50% of the population are below average. That's terrible. Okay, how many people think they're the same as other areas? Okay, a few pessimists. How many people think you're better than the other areas? A few optimists. How many people think they just don't know? Yeah, the vast majority of us. We don't often think about this. And I'll come back to my view of this after the next sort of set of slides. So where are we in implementation research? Well, we have vast bodies of knowledge. I'm going to use audit feedback as an example for some of this work. So people may know Noah Ivers, an academic family physician in Toronto, who led the 2012 Cochrane Review of Audit Feedback. He found 140 randomized controlled trials of audit feedback. And the median effect that you saw was an absolute improvement of 4% with an interquartile range of 1 to 16%. Imagine if you were doing a systematic review of a clinical area and you had 140 trials. You would think you could answer any possible question that was raised. Did people with blue eye color have a better or worse response than people with brown eye color? And one of the things about this area is the way the research is done and reported is often we can't ask very sophisticated questions. NOAA did try and look for potential effect modifiers and found that large effects were seen if the baseline compliance was low, the source was a supervisor or colleague, it was provided more than once, it was delivered in both verbal and written formats, and it included both explicit targets and an action plan. Perhaps more worryingly, we did a cumulative analysis where we looked at how, as new trials get published, do they change what we know? And so it's not really a cumulative meta-analysis, but conceptually it's similar. And hopefully you can see from this graph that probably around about 1999 there were 30-odd trials, and it kind of suggested there's about a 5% improvement. And really, it's following about a little bit, but there's not been any major change in the kind of effect sizes or ranges that we're seeing. it's kind of, we've done since 1999 a further 60-odd trials, but arguably have not particularly added anything to the literature that actually we claim that we do. So I think this is potentially one indication that we aren't doing as well as we could do. And Noah has a great way of framing papers, so he called this growing literature stagnant science. And I think as implementation researchers, we really need to make sure that we're doing growing literature, we're actually also growing our science. So I'm going to go back through Malcolm's sort of 5 groups and just sort of think about this from a research or from an implementation research perspective. So are we asking the right questions or relevant to use of research? And I would say we're kind of probably not. And there are 3 major problems, one of which I'm calling balkanization in implementation research, then poor intervention design, and then failure to plan future research based on current knowledge. So balkanization is a great word. It is basically the process of fragmentation or division of a regional state into smaller regions or states that are often hostile or non-cooperative with one another. So historically, when the former Yugoslavia split basically into 4 or 5 countries, this was what balkanization was. Serbia didn't talk to Croatia, and in fact, as we know, there was major conflict in that region. The problem with organization and implementation research is, I think, it's just as prevalent. So Ian Graham, Jacqueline Tischer, and myself in the early 2000s did a study where we asked 30 funders if they have some form of responsibility for knowledge translation. And they all said yes, so 30 funders in 8 countries, but they had 31 different terms for the field. And the problem is, I think all of these terms are largely about addressing the same issue. How do we support healthcare systems, healthcare professionals, our patients, to use evidence better to improve quality of care? But you'll have people who say, well, I'm a knowledge transfer researcher. And that's subtly different from being a knowledge mobilization researcher. And it gets in the way of science. And so it's likely that we're not learning from each other, but also that we're probably answering questions that other people have asked that have just called something slightly different. Once, after a presentation, was asked whether you needed to have knowledge transfer before you had knowledge mobilization. I said, I don't know. Don't actually understand what the situation is. I don't think it's helpful because often breaking it into various sorts of steps doesn't make a difference. And if we look at the sort of major research funders in the world, the NHMRC in Australia called this area research translation, T1 translation as well as T2. How do we call it knowledge translation research? Although CHR is now going into implementation research and saying that it's pretty different from knowledge translation research. In Europe, we call it implementation research. In the US, if you went to the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, you would call it quality improvement research. If you went to the NIH, you'd call it determination implementation research. Global implementation research is probably the main field. But then the people in quality improvement, having spent 20 years saying that we had to just get on with stuff in these 2 words and we didn't need to do any research because we knew what to do, decided we need to do research, and instead of saying, oh, it's just implementation research, we called it improvement research, which just drives me crazy. And the problem is that the people who do improvement science don't talk to the people who do implementation science, and the people who do knowledge translation science may not talk to improvement scientists. And so we promulgate this sort of failure to actually use knowledge. And then we also have a whole range of other streams of activity. So in nursing, people often talk about knowledge utilization research, which is kind of similar to knowledge translation research, which is kind of similar to other things. Diffusion innovation from a broad range of sectors, tech transfer, social organization science, quality assurance and quality improvement. All of these things have got something to say about how we support people to use knowledge better to improve the decisions they've got. But we actually put them in little boxes and then keep the boxes separate. And that, I think, is not helpful and it's not fundamentally scientific. So, a major problem is that we've just actually sort of fragmented our field and are not learning from it. The next major issue is that we have remarkably poor intervention design. I think this has been probably the Achilles heel of implementation research and knowledge translation research for 25, 30 years. I've been guilty of this. You basically do a trial of an intervention that's you kind of thought through, but you've not made explicit your assumptions, why you think it works, and you do the trial. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, and you often end up realizing you don't actually know what you tested and you don't actually know why it did work. So Martin Eccles, a very close friend and colleague, highlighted the ISRIAT principle. Many people will have heard this before, so I'm not going to ask the question, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. In our hospital, in our organization, in the Canadian Diabetes Association Guideline Implementation Committee, given that Kathy is sitting opposite me, we sit around the table, and whoever's talking longest, loudest, got most grey hair, least hair, will kind of somehow that voice will come forward, and we'll do something. But we often don't sort of say, well, why do you think this will work? What's the justification for it? What do we need to be in the system for it to work? And we end up then testing solutions that may not be optimized to what the problem is we're trying to solve. The third area, and this is coming back to the work I showed of already Noah's, is that we don't build cumulative science. One of the kind of tenets of science is it's self-corrective. So we try things out, and basically we replicate that, and then we sort of try and understand what the situation is. And if we found that something that we thought previously was positive and it wasn't, that's replicate or correct. We no longer conclude that. But in KT and implementation research, I would say we fundamentally fail to do that. We don't make use of the available evidence when we are planning future research. So in a different review that was done with people like Andrew Trico and Noah Ivers, we looked at 142 trials of diabetes quality improvement strategies that were published up till 2011. We'd done a first version of the review with Carl Shajan in 2006, where there were only 50 trials. So in the space of 5 years, there had been a traveling advance. Wow, just think about all the additional knowledge that you get by traveling the body. However, it really looked as though the new 100 trials were not using the available knowledge from the 50 pre-existing trials. They were creating local kind of custom interventions that weren't informed by the disciplines that know something about behavior change and weren't involved by the literature. And so when we kind of basically updated the guideline review, 142 trials, again, we should be able to tell you whether patients at high cardiovascular risk with type 2 diabetes will benefit more from A versus B. We end up kind of concluding if you do something, it probably works. It's not helpful. It's not helpful because people aren't using available knowledge as they plan future knowledge. And we did an overview of reviews of reminders, systematic reviews of reminders in 2009. By that time, there were 35 systematic reviews of reminders. We do not need 35 systematic reviews of reminders. They were reviewing the same literature. You have things like Brian Haynes' series of reviews over probably a 30-year period, and there's a good epoch review, and you've got just a profusion of reviews, which would suggest to me that people didn't say, has someone answer the question before they did the review, and they've wasted a lot of resource. So we should be building on available science. What about our research methods? Are we good at research methods? I spent a lot of my career systematically reviewing, implementation intervention trials, and a lot of them suck. Okay? They are done badly, and there's no excuse for that. They are technically flawed. This is getting better, but people still ignore the fact they're going to cost a trial. So they basically have the incorrect sample size calculation, incorrect analysis. They have small numbers of units. So we did a systematic review of 235 trials of guideline dissemination implementation studies that have been published up to 2000, and the mean number of units per arm was 7. It's pretty damn small. If nothing, even if they're adequately powered, it also means that they're probably pretty fragile. Because when you randomize 14 units into a 2-arm trial, it's a bit sort of, you're going to get imbalanced quite often. You have unrosy effect sizes. I'm guilty of all these sins, most of them. yeah, we've got 20 clusters and we do our sample size calculation. That suggests we can get a 20% effect, 20% improvement. So we put that into our sample size or justification of grant, ignoring the fact that the average effect we're seeing in these trials is between 4 and 8%. Now, why, as a peer reviewer, we don't say, why do you think your intervention is going to be 3 times better than what we're seeing in all the other interventions, particularly because you haven't made use of the available evidence for the and yeah, there's also issues in the fact that the majority of these studies are 2-arm trials. So if you take 140 trials of order and feedback, most of them are trials of order and feedback versus control. And we don't need to know about order and feedback versus control at all. That question was answered by 2000. It, in general, works. So there's a big default range, and so what we should be doing is asking how, why, under what circumstances we can use order and feedback optimally. And that requires us to do things like head-to-head trials of order and feedback A versus order and feedback B, or order and feedback versus academic detailing, or order and feedback and academic detailing versus academic detailing. So we should be moving away from 2-arm trials versus, with a control arm when we are testing interventions that we already know work. And we should make better use of multi-arm trials, factorial designs, other approaches which will yield more information just from the design of what we do. I've already talked about the fact that interventions are poorly described. So Heather Colquhoun is also in the room, looked at the use of theory in the 140 trials of order and feedback, and found how many trials explicitly use theory?
Like less than 10, I think it's 7 or.
So 7 or 8 trials out of 140 gave a theoretical justification about why they were doing it. Yeah, we're not just interested in does it work, but if we understand how it works, then that's going to help us with issues around generalizability. We should hold our feet to the fire about being explicit about why we think our intervention will work and what are the mechanisms of action. We then have very limited efforts to explore causal mechanisms. We provide a black box trial result, which is great if the trial works. The trial works. Get it in the Lancet, BMJ. Okay, can we transfer this trial from Ottawa to Toronto? And we don't actually know whether we can because we can't think through what the causal mechanisms are, what the antecedents are necessary in the environment to make this trial likely successful. So unless we actually explore this further, then we're going to hinder our ability to do generalization. We're getting a little bit of echo back, which suggests that someone's got their microphone on. But can you just make sure you're all on mute? Economic evaluation is largely ignored. So up to 2,000, less than, or 14 out of 235 studies actually reported an economic evaluation. And the issue around implementation is that healthcare systems have fixed and very limited resources to do implementation. And so, you know, we could develop Rolls-Royce interventions that could never be rolled out across Ontario, and it's a waste of, it's potentially waste of time doing that research. So we need to actually understand what are the implications. Someone's making a lot of noise now. The economic and system implications of the interventions we do. But could you make sure you're on mute, please? Thank you. And I'll talk a bit about reporting. In fact, Noah Ivers took the diabetes QI view and looked to see whether there was improvement over time in the methods of the 142 diabetes trials, and there wasn't a great improvement. So the trials that were done in the last 2 or 3 years were, in general, as bad as the trials done 10 years ago. Now, yeah, when I did my first cluster trial, this is my confession, I didn't even know it was a cluster trial. And it's really hard to find any literature about cluster trials. Alan Donner was publishing technical things from Western, but that was about it. Now, we know, yeah, there's so much information about how to plan cluster trials. And there's no excuse in terms of sort of making some of these fundamental errors. Moving on. Efficient research, regulation, and management. I'm not going to sort of talk about this a lot. What I would say is we've actually made some sort of some progress in terms of how trying to improve this. So one of the things that I was involved with Charles Baer from Western, Monica Talliard from Ottawa, was the development of the Ottawa Statement for the Ethical Design and Conduct of Custom Randomized Trials. Our experience over 20 years is every time we went to an RED with a cluster trial, and they've never seen a cluster trial, you'd have to go and talk to them about what a cluster trial was, why it's different to an individual patient trial, why what you're doing is actually justifiable, but the principles that they often just apply, which are around individual trial and ethics, don't apply. So we developed this basic statement, which is, I think, getting reasonable traction. Fully accessible research information. Okay, I'm into the last box. We don't actually know the extent of publication bias in this field. Okay, often we say things that make us hope that it's not going to be that bad. Alan Donner used to point out that the fact that people actually analyze their cluster trials and so they weren't cluster trials would increase the likelihood that they were spuriously positive trials and therefore reduce the likelihood that you had publication bias. But we actually don't know. Before I came to Canada, probably 20 years ago, we did some work with brands for HECFA in the US, who was doing a review of interventions to improve preventive measures in the elderly. And they gave us access to a database of studies that are submitted by healthcare organizations as part of their accreditation process in the US, and they were around quality improvement. And we thought they'd all be pretty awful, simply because not going to be very informative. And there were a large number of trials that had never been published. So in the US, large healthcare organizations are doing trials, and they're just not publishing them. So we do have a publication bias issue. We just don't know what it is. And I think as we go into sort of more natural experiments, we probably have a much greater publication bias problem, because I'm more likely to publish my positive introductory time series than my negative introductory time series. So we just don't know about that. And what about unbiased and usable research reports? This is work by Paul Grazio, that basically shows that when we look at non-pharmacological treatments, so these aren't just implementation science, but kind of complex interventions. It could be physio interventions or health system interventions, implementation interventions. You basically have a moderately poorly reported, which means that even if you publish a trial, someone coming along can't understand what you did, which makes it really hard for them to replicate or do a systematic review. And so we need to do better. So if we come back to this quote that says that globally we probably waste 8% of our research environments, our research investments. What's it like in implementation science? I honestly don't know, but I think there's enough signals to say probably no worse in other settings, but I don't think we can be confident we're any better. And so as implementation researchers, I think we have to take ownership of this. This is our problem. It's no one else's problem. If we do bad science, I think eventually people will come back and say, you've wasted the sort of 15 years of resource we put into KT or implementation research. There's no concrete information that's helpful to healthcare systems, and they'll invest their money somewhere else. So we need to own this and do a better job. So we've been thinking a little bit about what we might do, and we've got kind of 3 potential solutions. There are likely many others. Okay, there are many ways in which we can address this. So these aren't the only ideas out there, and you may have your own ideas which would be really helpful. But these are 3 things we're explicitly looking at. One is to think about starting to develop what we call the implementation laboratories to test comparative questions of interventions at scale. The second is to use methods to enhance the information we get from evaluations of implementation interventions. And the final is to enhance informativeness of systematic reviews of implementation interventions. So, what do we mean by a implementation research laboratory? We mean a research team integrates into a healthcare system undertaking problems research directly rather than that healthcare system. It reduces a whole range of the problems that we face when we're trying to do individual studies where you bring teams together, you then have to negotiate access to the healthcare system, you then have to get funding, you then do the trial, and then by the time the trial is done, your money's run out, you're exhausted, you're lucky if you write it up, and your team basically disperses. This is about building relationships that allow you to sort of keep teams together and keep access to the healthcare system. It allows for formal and informal linkages of mutual advantage from the research team and the healthcare system. there are many groups in the healthcare system who do work which is incredibly valuable and have a huge experiential knowledge about what works in terms of trying to improve the quality of care. And researchers, we sit in our ivory towers, and we can learn a huge amount by partnering with them in terms of what they've learned. But also they can get a huge amount of benefit out of the kind of ideas being generated in our ivory towers. So it really has improved the dialogue, the dialogue on both sides, and it can explicitly recognize the roles and responsibilities of the research team and healthcare system. So whenever no IDA's paper, no more business as usual. Kind of said this already, sort of basically, and the key issue here is we need to move away from two-arm trials of order feedback versus control to more head-to-head trials. The problem when you want to do a head-to-head trial is you'd anticipate a smaller effect size, so your sample size is going to go through the roof. Okay, you're not going to be able to sort of justify 20% effect size or a 7% effect size. You're probably looking for 2 or 3% effect size. So that's a really big sample size and would be a real challenge for healthcare, for a research team coming together to go out and recruit 5,000 family practices in Ontario. Probably take 20 years to do the recruitment, and you probably wouldn't get there. So what can we do? Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And so, given that Jamie introduced me, I thought I should just point out what I think was very important work that he did and he led with Heather and others, was published this year. So we don't know, the interquartile range of feedback goes from 1 to 16%. We don't know how to optimize it, but Jamie has been doing work with Heather that's gone out and interviewed about 20 world experts in feedback from education, from organizational psychology, from health psychology, from different fields, and basically said, how do you think, or what makes ordering feedback more effective or less effective? And they came up with 15 ideas to provide ordering feedback more than once. Most of the trials in Noah's review provided feedback once. Gosh, it's not very hard to do, but something would be very helpful. Provide feedback as soon as possible. Sometimes provide feedback based on data of a year old. It's very easy for clinicians to say, oh, that was last year. I had a really bad year last year. This year I'm much better. Provide individual or general data. These are the things that these are ideas that if you're planning ordering feedback, you should take into account. But they're things where we can now have to test empirically. What happens if you give feedback every 3 months versus 6 monthly? For a healthcare organization providing feedback, the cost differential is quite large. If you found that by basically giving it 6 monthly, you got the same benefit as 3 monthly, you're saving your potential resource. If on the other hand, you get more bang for the buck if it's 3 monthly, you have the opportunity to sort of see whether the additional cost is worth the additional investment. So we need to do head-to-head trials where we're starting to test these interventions. And I've largely said that, but the first bullet point. One of the salvation here is increasingly healthcare systems are rolling out improvement programs. And they're doing it at scale across the healthcare system. And there may be opportunities to work with them to actually start to embed randomized controlled trials of different ways of delivering their improvement programs. Okay? So, what happens? Let's say we're currently doing some work with Health Quality Ontario, which I'll say a little bit more about in the end. And Health Quality Ontario is a provincial advisor to Ontario about quality. As part of its mandate, it provides feedback reports to primary care and long-term care. So they've been doing this for probably 2 or 3 years. And we have a conversation with them that goes something like, it's really good that you're doing ordering feedback. There's a top review that says that it works in general. But it also seems like there's kind of quite a lot of things that might improve how it works that we don't know about yet. Are you confident that you have got it absolutely right? And because the people at HQO take this very seriously, it's their job and they want to improve their quality of care, or if they say, no, we kind of recognize we've made a number of pretty arbitrary decisions. We think our feedback's good, but we don't know if it's as good as it could be. So we then say, well, would you be willing to actually work with experts in ordering feedback to start testing or different ways of delivering ordering feedback in your routine feedback mechanisms. So we start off with the standard order feedback that HCO is doing, and that's order feedback A. We test it against B. B is better. So B becomes HCO's standard. But then we do another trial where we test B versus C. C is no better, it's more expensive, it's less acceptable. We get rid of C. So then we move on to testing B versus D. So we plan with the same group a series of sequential trials to address the questions of importance. And because they're already committed to delivering to a wide range of health organizations in Ontario, we get the benefit of the sample size that they have. The benefits for the healthcare system, or for H2O, is that this is a function of being a learning organization, using your activities to learn how to do better. It hopefully means that when they report to the government, the ministry, they can say, look, we've actually done work that's demonstrated that we improved our effectiveness by 2%, from 4% to 6%, at no extra cost. Kind of quite a nice message. And also they get linkages to Noah Ivers, who is a great source of knowledge and information. The benefit for us as implementation scientists is there's an ability to test important but potentially subtle variations in order feedback that may be effect modifiers. There's one trial in the literature that tests what happens if you change the comparator. If instead of giving a 50% average compliance with guidelines, you give, I think it's an 80% benchmark. That shows actually just that simple change increases at the population level improvements that are associated with audit feedback. It could be that if so when you're choosing your comparator, this is something that may be effect modifying. What some bodies do is they sort of say, oh, well, the way we'll do that is we'll give multiple comparators. So we'll give the 50% and the 80th percentile, so that people have all the information. Problem is that if I'm performing around 47%, and you give me two comparators, I'll say, oh, I'm good. On average, I feel really good. But I'm not necessarily going to stretch myself thinking I should be able to achieve 80%. So we'll justify what we do against the comparators we've got. So modifying comparisons might be really important. And in fact, one of Jamie's examples is include clear comparators that reinforce the desired behavior change. Okay, so the evidence is saying don't give people 3 or 4 comparators that confuse them, and they can probably find themselves in close to one of the comparators, so they must be okay. Actually, force it a bit. So a couple of examples of these implementation laboratories. The first is in the UK, and we're working with the NHS Blood and Transplant Authority. They have a 10-year history of doing national clinical audits where they routinely involve every hospital in England and Wales. But when we had the conversation with them about, are they sure they've got it right, they were kind of confident that they hadn't necessarily got it right, and they did things like produce 130-page audit reports that had 50 pages of background information for anything that was actionable could be given. So it kind of felt like there's probably pretty straightforward things we could do to help them do better. And this is a really well-respected program. This has got a lot of credibility. So this is something which is seen as being completely appropriate in the healthcare system. So we're doing, funded by the UK National Institute of Health Research, 2 replicated 2x2 factorial designs where one of the factors is saying what happens if we improve the design of the feedback. So not won't be surprised we've actually sort of said, provide less information, put the actual stuff up front, make it clear, as just a very kind of key element to that. And the third the second factor is about better delivery, providing resources to hospitals about how they can better use the audit feedback to stimulate change in their setting. Because we're working with the NHS Blood and Transplant Authority, who have relationships with every hospital in England and Wales, our sample size is 152 hospitals. If we as a research team wanted to go out and recruit 152 hospitals, it would take us 10 years. We'd have abandoned this. We'd have said, oh, we need 10 hospitals. Therefore, we're going for a sample size where the effect size would be 50%. So by working with a partner who's got these linkages, it allows us to do a lot more. I've mentioned our work with H2O, with the Ontario Healthcare Implementation Laboratory. So we're planning over the next few years 4 sequential trials, and then which is feedback to family practices and long-term care homes. And one of the issues when we started this, there were 140 family practices getting reports, there's now 500. So we can probably start to do more exciting things within the trials that we're doing. The first trial that we're doing is going to be in long-term care homes, and it's going to be around antipsychotics and sedative use, and we're going to basically do a trial where we compare different comparators. And also whether you frame the message positively or negatively. You are protecting 85% of your patients, you're putting at risk 15% of your patients. If those things improve the effectiveness of order feedback, it costs HCO nothing to deliver them. They just can turn it on tomorrow, and they're going to get slightly better results. And then, this is my pinky in the brain moment. People know about Pinky. There's not stars in this room say people know about Pinky in the Brain. It's a great Warner Brothers cartoon about 2 laboratory rats, Pinky and the Brain. One of them's a genius, one of them's insane. And they basically, one person is a brainiac with an open skull and his brain is pulsing all the time, and the other looks like your TED camp of, what's going on, brains? And they had to plot to take over the world. At the end of every show, Pinky turns to Brain and says, so Brain, what are we going to do tomorrow? And Brain says, the same as you did yesterday, try and take over the world. So META-Labs are Pinky in the Brain moments. We are starting to establish META-Labs around the world, and we're just going where we can do it, where you have healthcare partners delivering audit feedback. But what would be really good is then we can learn from each other. So how do we learn, what can HCO learn from the experience of the NHS and blood and transplants pathology? And so we're starting to create the idea of a META-Lab where we actually get people from those groups to meet regularly to be updated about what the evidence is, but to think about what they're doing and what they can learn from each other. So META-Labs allow shared learning across studies and laboratories, shared expertise, opportunities for planned replication. We very rarely replicate. But we found that if we change comparators to 80% rather than 50%, we get a larger population benefit. Let's try that somewhere else and see whether it is a consistent finding. Because a lot of these sort of issues that particularly Jamie and Heather are highlighting are pretty hardwired into us. So a bit of replication might actually say these are fundamentally human elements about how our brains work. And we can also, I think there'll be links to the benefits of getting HCO to talk to the people in the NHS and transplant pathology, because there'll be a whole range of things they want to talk together about which aren't particularly research-oriented. So, the good news is that we formed the META laboratory in April. And if you take this group, the first laboratory was the NHS Blood and Transplant Authority. Second was the Ontario Health Care Replication Laboratory, to work with HQO. The third is, again, Ontario Born, which is a Better Outcomes Research Network, I think, or Registry Network, which is providing feedback to hospitals about perinatal care. The fourth is a dental program in Scotland, and then we're trying to work with primary care in Australia. And we're starting to get together to sort of say we can share that to others. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to say, I said earlier that design of intervention is probably the weakest element of implementation science over the last 30-odd years, and we now have models that actually allow us to think more smartly about how we should design our interventions. This is from implementation science. It's Simon French, who was in Australia, is now in Queens, led on, and basically says that there are four key steps to try to design an intervention: identify who needs to do what differently, identify the barriers and enablers need to be addressed, identify which intervention can most overcome them, and then how you're going to measure it. Now, I would have thought that most people on this call, this would be sort of fairly straightforward, but it is remarkable how often people jump to a solution before they've actually worked out what the problem is and what drives the problem. And the more we can be explicit about these, it allows us to specify what we think the causal mechanisms are. We think fundamentally one of the issues is that GPs lack self-efficacy about advising patients around why they don't need an X-ray for low back pain. So we can design an intervention that will target self-efficacy, and we could measure self-efficacy alongside the trial to see whether our intervention activated the pathway we thought was important, and did that lead to the improvements we're interested in? So, moving on to enhancing the importance of inferences, I've touched on this already a bit. Rigorous quantitative designs like trials allow us to make strong causal inferences about the effects of the program. Travis, Cook, and Campbell call this causal description. Did A lead to B? Did our ordering feedback lead to reductions in test ordering? However, it tells us very little about the mechanisms through which the program operates. Travis, Cook, and Campbell call this causal explanation. How, under what circumstances did our intervention work? And I think that information is really important if we're thinking about the generalisability of the information that we're generating. Because it'll start to allow us to say, if self-efficacy is not a problem in Ontario climate practice, then we don't think we really don't think we should try our intervention. We should do something else. So a better understanding of causal explanation is likely to improve understanding about generalised virtual study findings. And we can do this in a whole range of ways. So I would say the classic audit, or the classic implementation trial, is a two-arm trial versus control of a poorly developed intervention where there's virtually no process evaluation at all. And so why don't we just routinely sort of say, okay, the trial is this bit, but we can use different design elements. We can do multi-arm trials. We can use factorial designs. We can use balanced and complete block designs that have implicit replications within them to enhance the knowledge that we get out of an individual study. And in fact, the first O-Hill trial is going to be a 2x2 factorial design. And then process evaluations. Again, traditionally process evaluations have been kind of qualitatively focused, going in fairly in a grounded way, saying we're trying to understand and service people's experiences of being participating in the trial, receiving the service, and potentially any adverse consequences. Really helpful, give us a rich understanding about what's going on. But if we increasingly are explicit about what we think our mechanisms of action are, we can actually test whether our intervention led to or activated the pathways we thought were interested in. So we're calling these theory-based process evaluations. And a final thing that we don't do very often is we can do temporal evaluation. Do our interventions, are there learning curves and decay effects? How sustainable are effects of the intervention? But just as saying we're going to look over time within the trial structure at the effects of our intervention. Final thing is trying to make better sense of systematic reviews. So at the end of our diabetes QI review, when we came to Kat and said, if you do something, it'll probably work, and she said, duh, we kind of worried. I mean, I spend a lot of my time doing reviews, and if you do a review of 140 trials and all you can say is in general stuff works, it's not very helpful. It suggests one of two things. One is that our systematic review methods are terrible, or the other is that actually we're doing trials really, really badly. Well, I suspect it's a bit of both. But this was a CHR-funded project with some very, very, very stunningly bright mathematicians, to say, can we make more information out of systematic reviews and testing different ways? So, one of the problems in the diabetes reviews is that most of the interventions have multiple complex and possibly interacting intervention components. And using traditional metric regression, it's very hard to separate them out. So we're using Bayesian hierarchical multivariate metric regression, which looks like it does actually start to parse out the individual components of the intervention. We wanted to look at the effects of contextual factors on the intervention components. So effects, again, the same analytical approaches. The full reporting, we said we'll go out and try and survey authors and add their information to the Lancet review and see whether it allows us to ask or get different answers. So the first round we went out, we got a 27% uptake from authors in terms of providing additional data. We're going out again. But if we find that surveying authors is useful, that would be beneficial. What we have found is that people are more likely to respond if the trial was published in the last 3 years, which would argue that we should move to living reviews where trial comes out and within 3 months we go back to Kat and say, what did you do? Can't understand anything that you did. And the final thing is a recognition that when we do these studies, or these reviews, we often create fairly arbitrary classifications of interventions. So our review includes case management and team changes. And with the best will in the world, we're not sure whether they are two distinct interventions. Could be there are three different flavors of team changes that we've kind of just lumped together. And so I think we should also be trying to understand better, what are the implications of different classifications of our interventions that will allow us hopefully to sort of basically drill down more effectively. Instead of having a crude description, what happens if we focus on the methods of action? So we have recoded 142 trials with behavior change techniques to see whether that allows us a different medicine. So that's kind of it. So I have spent a lot of time doing implementation research, and I'm passionate about it because if we can improve quality of care, we actually save people's lives and improve their quality of life. We have a huge evidence base that is shared we can improve quality of care, but I think the way, and there's been a big increase in funding of implementation science in the last 15 to 20 years, but I feel that we're not making the most of that opportunity. I think as implementation researchers, we have to be intellectually critical of what we do and then think about doing it better. So that's it. Thank you. Okay, how do we do this?
So I'm waiting for some chat questions to come in. So we'll ask anyone here if you'd like to come in.
So questions, yeah, thanks very much, Jeremy, that was great. If you're trying to figure out how to type in a question into the chat, first thing is to get out of full screen mode, I suspect. Down on the lower right, there will be a chat box that says send to KT moderator. That's all I got. That's all the help I can provide.
Amy, does anyone in Ottawa have any questions? Why don't we start there?
I'm not here. I'm not seeing a whole lot of hands here now.
Any questions? Oh, Western has a question. Go ahead, Western.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thanks for a good presentation. This is Sheila Moody at Western, and I just wondered, I don't have my camera on, so you might not be able to see me, but my question is, in trying to do something similar where I was doing research trying to do it across the country, the area I ran into mostly was ethics related. So getting ethics, once you get ethics at Western, for example, you also have to get ethics at McGill and at all the other universities that are affiliated with hospitals, and sometimes also at the hospital. I wondered if you had any comments about overcoming those barriers, because they can actually hold up projects for years.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, what we are doing in Ontario is through Clinical Trials Ontario, basically trying to get hospitals to sign up that if one ethics board approves something, then the other hospital should approve it. They can take the information by or be informed about the trial, but then accept that this has been approved elsewhere. And that is perfectly legal within a legal framework of ethics regulation. Kat is smiling at me, I suspect because there's been a lot of teething questions. We have the same system in the UK where we develop multi-site research ethics committees. And the idea is if you have to go to more than 3 sites, you went to the MREC, and the MREC would give a blanket approval, and then the local site would actually sort of allow you to move forward. And probably for the first 3 years, you got the MREC, and then the local site wants to make lots of changes. And it's only by going through this process that then we're able to point out that actually they needed to get the local research ethics committees in line. So I would hope that within a 3-year period in Ontario, it will be better. I think then there is an issue that says, frankly, we need to have the same system sort of basically at a national level, and we need to think about what are the levers in which we can do that. It may be, depending on what happens with it, but something like the SPORE initiative with CHR might provide a platform that says we want to conduct high-quality research across the country. We need to have a better harmonized ethics approach. So I think the answer is in Ontario, it should be slightly less painful for the next 2 or 3 years, and then hopefully a lot less painful across the country. is going to be painful for the foreseeable future. Hopefully things like the Ottawa Statement at least start to give people a way of thinking about this, and we've done work in how to train ethics board chairs and other things.
Yeah, I think we really need a huge group of people, and maybe that's happening at that implementation laboratory, to move this forward in a very systematic way, because the whole ethics thing, you really want to collaborate across the country to collect data, but it just becomes such a barrier that you end up working with the same groups all the time because it's easier.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a chatted question from Jen Tomzoni, who's at Queen's. How did you go about setting up the implementation laboratory?
So it's largely what we said. We identified partners who are doing this at scale. So we've currently got a grant in with the NHMRC to work with the National Prescribing Service in Australia. They have an electronic network of 500 family practices. And the reason that one came about is that Noah Ivers and I gave a workshop at NAPRAG in Ottawa about 2 years ago, and someone in the audience was a professor of general practice from Adelaide, Nicholas Stocks, who was involved in the NPS work. So he approached us and said, I actually think NPS might be an interested in trying to do this stuff. And he basically facilitated the phone call. And it took us about 2 to 3 years to get to the level of a grant that went into NHMRC. But what we have there is a very strong group of local investigators who we know can run the trial. We're providing sort of the idea, and then we have international experts on feedback. And the National Prescribing Service sees this as part of their business improvement model. So one of the key issues is demonstrating a commitment to the partner organization that they will always have a chance to veto, that you recognize that they're working under incredible time pressures and you need to be respectful of them, and spending time where they get to hopefully trust you and see that you've got something that will be helpful for them. So the science stuff is the easy bit. It's actually the interpersonal and the kind of the relationship building, which is probably the most challenging part of this. But I'd say that's probably true of any large-scale project where you're working with the healthcare system. Yeah.
Nothing else here. Anything?
Yes, Sylvia. I'm Sylvia. I work at GP Program Shared, and I'm also a student at Institute for Health Policy Management. And so I'm doing my PhD actually. So a lot of this is very interesting. Thank you for presenting to us. I guess that's a two-part question. The first one is, when you were talking about comparator-specific interventions, with comparator targeting the same mechanism of change, for example, self-efficacy. So it would be on feedback or self-efficacy plus education or self-efficacy plus. Is that the idea?
Well, no, I think you'd want to be very clear about what it is. If you thought self-efficacy was a major issue, and not rewarding feedback would be a good intervention. To some extent, rewarding feedback assumes self-efficacy. So if you did if you were building an intervention from the ground and you said self-efficacy is a problem, you then to say, well, what are the things that can improve self-efficacy? And there are things like self-monitoring. Monitoring can be a reinforcer, which is good, but also rehearsal, skill development, other factors around that. So I'd start with what we think the mechanism of action is, or what we think the target is, and then which interventions and which behavior change techniques might be useful, and what are the methods of delivery. So education is a method of delivery rather than an intervention, because you can address social norms, you can address self-efficacy, you can address knowledge gaps around that. But so you might end up with a multifaceted intervention that says, here are the components we think are targeting self-efficacy. This is targeting social norms. This is targeting the external environment. But in a process evaluation, you could start to sort of say, did we see improvements in self-efficacy? Did we see improvements in social norms? Did the environmental change actually, was it enacted, and did it actually have the benefit? So it's creating that kind of careful logic model, and then using the logic model to think about what you measure.
I guess I didn't clarify that point. meaning that the comparators that are included are all targeting the same mechanism of change. So all of them would be targeting self-efficacy, or all of them in the trial would be targeting social norms, or would that be discussed later, like what they're actually targeting?
So I think I was using comparators, particularly in ordering feedback. Okay, and that was sort of basically when you find ordering feedback, do I just say here's your graph, or do I say here's your graph and here's your colleagues? But if I'm going to compare you to colleagues, I say this is what the average is for your colleagues, or this is a high performing colleague. So that was a very specific ordering feedback. In general, very few, our experience is that it's very unusual for there to be a single target. So it's not just self-efficacy. If we just improve self-efficacy, the world would be great. If it was, life would be so much easier. But normally you have 3 or 4 or 5 things you try to do. So the issue is, can you build a often multifaceted intervention that will specifically address the 3 or 4 factors that you think are, or drivers you think are important? But if you then do a theory-based process evaluation, you might find, yeah, actually we activated self-efficacy. We didn't actually improve social norms, but our intervention still worked. So maybe self-efficacy was sufficient, or maybe we should refine this and see whether we can do a better job with social norms. So it's building up that kind of that view.
I think we answered the second part of my question, which was, is the intention to build that faceted program to roll out that would actually demonstrate effectiveness with rolling out the
So the answer is yes, although I think the issue, so we've done a series of reviews, we've done a series of reviews saying do not fast interventions, are they more effective than single interventions? And then Janet Scribes, colleague in Ottawa, did an overview of reviews that have done that. And the problem is, it sounds really intuitive that most fast interventions should be more effective than single interventions, and the evidence base does not suggest that that's the way we're putting together these interventions is more effective if they're not fasted. And probably the reason is that people just sort of basically throw anything at the problem without thinking about what the problem is. So I think the next generation are likely to, sometimes they might do a simple intervention, often they will be multifaceted, but they should be based on a very clear logic model about what you're trying to change. So you understand why you're doing A and B, and that, and you might also say we have to do A before we do C. So you're starting to have those interdependencies being very clearly outlined.
So I'm going to do one more question, and then I do have a second question, but I'm going to ask Jeremy to answer it by email instead. But so the last question is from Michelle. She wants to know about optimization. Any solutions or approaches to resolve? What are the implications?
So every talk I give, I mention this and say this is a problem. And I have different slide decks, whether it's implementation research or knowledge translation research. I think we have to keep banging away and saying this is a problem, and not, if you like, allowing ourselves to be restricted by the box we're in. And then there are initiatives. So Heather has been leading a project where we're trying to sort of identify what the minimum elements of an intervention approach should be. But we've actually brought together people working in implementation research, in quality improvement, in public health, in behavior change. So I think we said any discipline which is about changing decisions and behaviors through something, I think, is how we had the entry point. And that may help us to, again, to start to develop either a Rosetta Stone, you call it a courgette, I call it zucchini, or maybe even we'll do that, for the purposes of scientific communication, we'll call it a courgette. We'll give that a North American zucchini rubbish. Just call it a courgette.
Great. That's, I think we're out of time. So, Jamie, do you want to close it up, or do you want me to do it?
No, that's great. Thanks very much, Jeremy. Greatly appreciate it. Very interesting, and I'm sure you'll get emails from people as the days progress. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.